thrilled to be here today with you again on Series 2 of Magicticity.
So Magicticity is the combination of two words, and it's a term we invented,
Right.
combining the word magic and the word authenticity, and it's meant to encapsulate that electric current that happens when you're presenting and you really connect with your audience.
Yes. And we have had really tremendous feedback from all of you. So we are very happy that this has been helpful. And Series 2 will include a number of topics that we agreed that we would have either a second version, which is a continuation of the same topic, or just new topics for you.
Yeah, and today is a continuation of a topic that we began a little bit last series, and it's about questions and about answering questions. However, the most important part of answering questions effectively is often not the answer itself. It's how you repeat or rephrase, most importantly, rephrase the questions that come into you, because that can help you to answer in a very calm and collected and concise manner. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes, and to what you were just saying, I think it also allows you to think about the question that you've received. It gives you a few moments to position the answer the way you think is most effective. But also, if you practice repeating the question, you won't forget to do it when the question cannot be heard properly or when the person doesn't have a mic. And then you include everyone so that everyone knows what you will be discussing.
Yeah.
And if you rephrase the question, it also becomes more effective for you to answer.
Yes, so there are two different things, and let's just clarify a little bit more.
Yes.
In a large group, you should always at a minimum repeat a question. And you repeat a question that's just very straightforward and simple.
Right.
If somebody said, "How did you travel here today?" How did I travel here today? You would have to repeat in a large audience.
Yes.
Because as Carla is saying, maybe not everybody heard. Even with a microphone, sometimes it gets muffled and people don't hear. So you always repeat a question in a large audience, and large we define as any time after 8 people. 6 to 8 is a kind of a twilight zone, and then after 8, it's definitely a large audience. But when you want to rephrase a question anytime, even if it's just with one person that you're speaking with, you want to rephrase if the question is very wordy, is a little edgy or hostile or challenging, or is downright hostile. You should always rephrase. And you rephrase for greater clarity, but you also rephrase to neutralize and to get right to the point of the question, right to the theme, the thesis behind the question.
And it's also good because many times you get comments and then a small question. So people, if they've heard the comment, maybe they forgot what the question was.
Yeah.
So you help everyone. And then also, if the question was hostile, say for example, then you want to neutralize that tone so that you can answer a question with clarity
and calmness and serenity.
Yes.
Because you don't need to own somebody else's hostility.
Right.
So what if somebody, let's give an example. A client had, in fact, a lot of clients in the financial industry get this question. Shame on you. Why the hell don't you have any more female senior portfolio managers?
Right.
Well, how would you rephrase that? There's an interrogatory that can save you in many cases when there's hostility or confusion. And it's the phrase, what about?
Yes, I love that.
And it's so nice and open. So in this case, what you could say is, what about senior female investors at our firm? And then you're free to go into, actually we have, for the industry, a large number. We're always looking for more. However, you can go into a neutral tone rather than accepting shame that the questioner for some reason decided to hit you with. rather than getting all caught up in the language of why the hell.
Yes.
And sometimes people do phrase questions like that.
And I think you also have the opportunity to address additional points.
Yeah.
So say, for example, you talk about the portfolio managers first, or the investment professionals first, but then you can go into adding where there are also women within the organization in senior positions, if that's the case.
If that's the case, as long as you're not evasive.
Exactly.
You always
Address the question first.
need to address the question
Yes.
first. Because otherwise you seem as though you're just,
Yes.
well, seem like you're a politician perhaps, because we've been seeing that a lot
Yes.
with politicians who, no matter what their party affiliation, tend to answer the question they wish to answer rather than the one that was actually asked. You can't do that. You have to answer the question asked. You just don't need to own all of the negative language. And the other thing is sometimes people just give a lecture.
Yes.
I've seen people in audiences want to establish their own credentials or credibility. So they'll go on and on and on and say, in my experience, I've seen blah, 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 and I think blah, blah, blah. Where's the question?
Right.
So in that case, you can say, especially in a large audience, I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? And often if you do that, the person who's not even asking a question yet will say, oh, what about the number of senior female portfolio managers in your firm? Then they'll go right to whatever the heart of the question is.
Right, right. You know, I recently watched a video, a series of videos from a woman that is making presentations on topics that are related to the work environment. And I saw that she was taking like 4 or 5 questions first, writing them down, and then she would address all of them in maybe a few minutes, so that she would be able to not address each question, but she would be answering all the questions that were in some instances similar, but and this gave her the opportunity to maybe talk about other things that were related to those questions as well. I'm not sure how I think about that. What do you think, Copie?
Well, so tell me a little bit more though. This was a video?
Yes.
She was creating a video, so her audience wasn't there.
No, the audience was there.
Oh,
so
the
this
audience
was a video,
was there.
and it was maybe 400 or 500 people.
Oh,
so it was
my
a big,
goodness.
big audience, right?
Yeah.
And she was on a stage, and she first gave her talk, and then when it was time for questions and answers, she took maybe 4 questions in a row, wrote them down.
And so she raised her hand and she had the questions
Yes,
come in
yes,
and she
exactly.
wrote them down.
Exactly. And then she looked at the questions, she read them, and then she said, okay, well now I'm going to talk about all these elements. So she went on and spoke maybe for 4 or 5 minutes about the questions. So in a way I thought it was interesting because a lot of the questions were hard questions. So she was able to maybe group them.
Yeah.
And she did. However, when there was one answer that she hadn't included in her response, she said, I haven't gotten to that specific question. I will think about the answer and I will come back to you later.
Oh,
so
interesting. So what did you think? I mean, since not being there, it's hard for me to visualize. I think it's interesting.
Yeah,
I think
it's a new way.
It's a new way. I think there's a danger in that you can seem a little disconnected from your audience. And we've talked about this a little bit, that even with a slightly larger audience or even a very large one, you can have a dialogue. It seems as though it takes away a little of the dialogue and has her still up there talking to everybody. And so that could be a negative or it could be fine. She certainly exercises greater control that way.
Yes, yes.
But I think that it not done skillfully, it could have some downsides.
I think that's a very good point. I think you need to have a lot of practice maybe to be able to do that. You'll probably, if you're newer to presenting, you may want to address each question first, and then practice to see if picking 2 or 3 questions at a time and then addressing them works for you. So I think this is also a work in progress, but the most important element here I think is practice.
Is practice, yeah, I think that's true. And as we always say, practice, practice, practice. That's the key to a lot of what we do. And what I advise my clients to do is practice when you're at a meeting and when you're not the person receiving the question, in your own head, rephrase every single question that everybody in the meeting receives. And then when it's your turn to field some questions, rephrase your own questions as well. But you need to start practicing rephrasing aloud. When I'm working with an entire group, I'll have people just rephrase. Just rephrase. They're not allowed to answer the question. And I can't tell you how many people I've said to them, you're not allowed to answer the question. People still jump to answer the question.
Yes, yeah.
Because what we're often doing when somebody asks us a question is that we're thinking of the answer. We're not really listening deeply to the question. And the rephrasing forces you to listen deeply to the question, which keeps you much more connected with your audience.
Right. So one last point I think is if you are sitting at a, let's say, meeting room, and it's not a stage, you have a notepad, you can also write the question as it's being said, and then you can repeat it. So maybe having that extra step, it takes a second, it doesn't take more than that. And it's also helpful to do that.
Well, it's also something you take away with you so that you can follow up and think about the answers to the questions.
Right.
And then you can email your client later and say, I told you this at the meeting and I've been mulling over your question. I wanted to add this as well.
Yes.
And it gives you another avenue of communication with your client that they might find to be very, very helpful.
And to that point, I would suggest that when you leave a presentation, if you're on the stage and you have a moment, I would sit down and write the questions that you got and also write the impressions that you got from that meeting. What are the key takeaways for you as a presenter? What could I have done better? What did I forget to do? So a little wrap up and feedback for yourself is helpful, because if you go back and do the same presentation next time or present to the same audience, you have some reference points that you'll remember a year from now of what happened that day, and maybe you can make a reference to that if it's the same audience, and if it's a different audience, then you can potentially do something, improve in some way.
Yeah, add things.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's enough for one thing for rephrasing.
Exactly.
And so you can get in touch with us by emailing info@magicticity.com. Contact. Okay. I always have Carla do this part because I always mess up. All right, so you say it.
Contact@magicticity.com.
Okay, and they can also get in touch with us via Twitter and Facebook.
And that would be great. If you'd like to give us a comment, share it with friends, and put some likes, I think it's good.
And also, if you have any interest in having you or your firm work with us, you can also reach out to us that way. Thank you.
Thank you.